วัสดีค่ะ
That's me.
ก็ยินดีต้อนรับนะคะเข้าสู่ Architecture Design for Society 2024 นะคะก็กิจกรรมนี้นะคะเป็นส่วนหนึ่งของการเฉลิมฉลองการครบรอบสถาปนาคณะสถาปัตยกรรมศาสตร์จุฬาลงกรณ์มหาวิทยาลัยนะคะ90 ปีซึ่งก็จะมีเป็นประจำทุกๆเดือนนะคะเดือนละ 2-3 ครั้งนะคะโดยเรามีผู้เชี่ยวชาญจากหลากหลายศาสตร์ทั้งระดับชาติแล้วก็นานาชาติมาแชร์ความรู้แง่คิดประสบการณ์เกี่ยวกับการออกแบบงานศึกษาวิจัยนะคะที่คำนึงถึงประเด็นทางสังคมแล้วก็เอื้อประโยชน์แก่สังคมให้กับผู้ร่วมฟังทุกท่านนะคะก่อนอื่นก็คณะสถาปัตย์นะคะขอขอบคุณบริษัทสกุลไทยนะคะที่ให้การสนับสนุนกิจกรรมดีๆในครั้งนี้ค่ะก็ขออนุญาตแนะนำตัวเองนะคะอาจารย์ศิรินทราเอื้อศรีทรัพย์นะคะจากภาคสถาปัตยกรรมภายในคณะสถาปัตย์ค่ะก็เนื่องจากวันนี้วิทยากรของเราเป็นมาจากอังกฤษนะคะก็จะขอดำเนินรายการตอนจากนี้เป็นภาษาอังกฤษค่ะGood evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished faculty member and esteemed participants. Welcome to our Architecture and Design for Society lecture series. Today events hold profound significance as it forms an integral part of grand celebrations commemorating the 90th anniversary of esteemed Faculty of Architecture Chulalongkorn University. The keynote speech by Paul White entitled Past to Present Future-Proof Selective Work of Buckley Gray Yeoman or BGY. The duration should be about 60 minutes. Once that is done, there will be a Q&A sessions. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let us know or raise your hand. Our staff will provide you a microphone. So may I call upon Assistant Professor Sarayut Sapsuk, the Dean of Faculty of Architecture, to present his welcome remarks.
So good afternoon, everyone. So it's lucky that we have Paul White come to our faculties. I say it's a chance or not, I don't know that. But it's lucky that he has worked in Bangkok. He do a lot of retail design in many shopping malls in Bangkok. So in that sense, we have a chance that he gave us a lecture to show us about his practice about building design and the designs of some of the renovations of the old structure of the building, both in England and also somewhere in Thailand as well. So it's also a great kind of him that he gave us 2 books here. It's about his work, a copy of his work, which is very interesting. So I'll put it in the shelf of the library so that everyone can see and you can have a chance to look at and to inspire the design of your study. So I will not take time so much because I think everyone wants to listen to the lecture by Paul White, and I just want you to focus on the work because looking through his work is very interesting. It's not only the idea of design, but also the use of the names to insert the existing structure, which is a way of sustainable of the future. Just so that Ajahn Kat introduce Paul White a little bit from his background. We'll start the lecture. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Tell me if I'm speaking too quickly and I can slow down. That's not a problem. So, this is Buckley Gray Yeoman. This is us as a practice. It was taken about 12 months ago in a space that you're going to see in a different way in a minute. We were formed in 1997. We're about 150 altogether. And we work across many different sectors, which I'll talk to in a minute. We were honoured this year to be voted Practice of the Year in the UK, which is a fantastic accolade in terms of the work that we do. And we are just in the top 100 practices worldwide. So we've still got a few places to climb to get up to the top 10, but we'll give it a go. We work across many different sectors, and one of the things that we really believe in is that we all go through training, whether it's 3, 5, 7 years to qualify, and what we don't want to do is become specialists in one area. We have a fantastic training, as I'm sure you do, in lots of different areas, and we want to use that expertise to design fantastic buildings in a range of sectors. So we're very much involved in workplace design, residential, hotels, schools and retail, and you'll see in a minute as well an art gallery that we've just done. And I think for us as a profession, that's a wonderful place to be, that we can be creative and that we don't need to be confined by a sector, because we can bring that learning to the next level. We have 3 offices. The main office is in London. We have a second office in Bristol, and then we've just opened one in Spain, in Madrid, and who knows where we'll go next, but it's exciting times. So we're slightly different to other architectural practices and designers. We like to call ourselves agents of opportunity, because that's what we see when we see projects, whether it's a piece of furniture, whether it's an interior, whether it's a building, whether it's an exhibition, whether it's a club. We see opportunity to change the world in a way that we think is for the better, and we like to think that we sit on the right side of unconventional, just always to this side of the line, not this side of the line. So our work spans many different sectors, but it can be looked at in 3 areas: interior architecture, placemaking, and pure architecture. And as the introduction mentioned, we've been really fortunate to design a number of stores in Bangkok. For anyone that buys and loves Fred Perry, put your hand up if you do. Oh, no, not many, okay. We've designed the first store, which was in Central Embassy, for Fred Perry. We took elements of the brand, the tipping on the polo shirt, the laurel, all those elements became part of the 3D branding of the space and how we imagined that a Fred Perry person would want to experience the space. We then were fortunate to be appointed on the Icon Siam store as well, again taking elements of what Fred Perry is about, the laurel, distorting it, creating these plinths that can display garments, as well as these hanging pieces that allow us to present the clothes. And then finally, M. Courtier, which again was a really important project for us, again bringing through the theme of Fred Perry. But the relationship with Fred Perry started with this project. This was their head office in central London, and it was opposite Covent Garden Tube Station. So anyone that knows central London knows that this is a heavily shop and retail district. And the client said to us, whatever you do not put Fred Perry on the front of this store. Because if you do, everyone will come in here and want to buy a polo shirt, and we're not selling polo shirts, we're the head office. So we said, well, we need to make sure that people understand it's a Fred Perry building. So we took the laurel, we took this motif, and then we distorted it. We made it from a series of plywood pieces that then morphed into a seat and then beyond into a desk. And this was the start of a fantastic relationship with Fred Perry, and we then went on to design 15 of their stores worldwide. We did one in Paris, New York, and then, I won't bore you too much with Fred Perry, but we also do workplace design as well. So we think about the needs of people that will come and use this space. This is a flexible space on Carnaby Street. Again, if you know central London, this is a really vibrant part of the city, and this design needed to reflect the people that we're going to use the space. We're going to use that environment to create this dynamic and flexible and creative space. We also reuse buildings. So this was a 1980s building which had this wonderful concrete structure hidden behind some plasterboard, and we revealed it. We introduced our experience in hospitality. We introduced a softness and a quality of detailing to really challenge the ethos of what an office should look like in the City of London. Project, again, in central London for Dorrington Panagram. This challenges the notion of what a reception is. So there is no reception desk. There's nobody sitting behind a desk waiting to meet you. They come from behind the curtain. There's a big fish tank in the middle here, which is this object in the central space, and people can use it either to sit down or to have a meeting. Another interior project for apparatus, lighting showroom, which showcases all of their light fittings that they design in New York and then sell in London. Cork Street, a listed building with a very sensitive addition of timber and marble to reflect the quality of the outside. And then something that we've been known for a long time, which is a theme I'm going to return to in the main lecture, which is about being authentic. And what we mean by that is really understanding the grain of a building, understanding what makes that building, and celebrating the richness that you get with the space that you have. So this project was an old printing mill, and the pieces that we found became pieces of sculpture within the space, and it was about what we could take away from the space rather than what we could add to it to give us that sort of impressive, authentic realization that this could function as an office building in this central part of London. And then in the last 12 months, we've done something quite non-architectural. We have opened a private members club in Shoreditch, where we have these large screens that display work by artists that can change depending on who we're showing, that can be a performance space, can be a drinking space, you can dine, you can entertain, you can do all these things. 2 weeks ago, Condé Nast had their awards in the space, and there's probably a few famous faces in here that took awards for that evening. But it's a super flexible space, and it represents everything that we as a practice are about, which is being entrepreneurial, being forward-looking, and trying to imagine different ways of design and realizing. So that's interior architecture. A big part of what we do as well is placemaking. Again, we're going to talk about this in more detail. This is Eccleston Yards. This was an old car park. This was a space that was left over behind Victoria Coach Station, and we realized the potential of this space to create a vibrant ground floor with landscaping that is movable. So even though these look like they're solid, I don't know if you can see it, but there's little points that a little truck can lift them up and move them out, and then create a dynamic, flexible space that can be used for many different things. And we also work a lot with landscape architects. This is the roof of a building that has the most fabulous backdrop, which is St. Paul's Cathedral. This is at roof level. When you get down to ground level, we have this mirror pond that reflects the dome of St. Paul's within that, but it also allows light to come down into the basement space below the gardens. So thinking about opportunities, thinking about how it is that we can make things that people don't quite realise are possible. We don't just work in London. This is in a place called Reading, which is about 50 miles north of London, and it was about how we can integrate the building into the landscaping and provide an environment that people can use throughout the year. And then finally, architecture. We build on different scales. This is Bishopsgate Goods Yard. This is a large master plan for that site, which we've just got planning permission for, and we're designing a number of buildings on that site, of which the image on the screen shows one of them. We also do student living, so this is Pure Aldgate in London, where we designed a dynamic facade that allows light to the student rooms, allows ventilation through the louvered facade, and creates this dynamic facade within what is a repetitive room arrangement. Adaptation and reuse of buildings is going to be part of the main theme of the talk. This is a project that we have we're developing at the moment, Portland House for Landsec. It's about what we add to the existing building. So at ground and first level, we have this wonderful podium detail, which is born out of the structure of the building, that's then extrapolated to create this double, triple height space, which becomes this point of entry into the building. We do new buildings. This was a project for Berners Allsop, in central London, a very crafted stone building, which when you step inside has this very contemporary interior with timber, marble and stone. The Buckley building, which arguably put our name on the map in terms of us about 15 years ago, reworking a warehouse building on the left, imagining new space and trying to rethink what it is to become an office building in central London. Our work extends beyond London. This is in Terrace, this is in Madrid, a project that we've just finished, which is a new build building of 5 stories with these great amphitheatre spaces that allow us to kind of naturally ventilate through the ground floor of the space, but also to provide an opportunity for people to meet and to experience the building in this way. And then the last 4 projects I'm going to just skip over because this is the basis of the main talk. This is Why London. This is the reinvention of a first generation building that was built there. It's very dynamic, it's very engaging in terms of how we've interpreted the structure and how that has led us into the way that we brand the building and think about how we describe the building. I've noticed as well, as the Dean showed me, that he's already been using this ceiling downstairs, so I can't really tell you that that's something that is new, but it's a very similar thing about how you can reflect something that's happening below and really change the perception of a scale. Technique, a project for general projects, an old printing house that we extended in a really sensitive way and designed this art object on the corner, which was this brick building, but looking at the upper floors, how we actually extended in timber, a lightweight construction that was environmentally sustainable, but also gave this fantastic quality in terms of the interior space. And then Eccleston Yards, a real lesson about how you can work with history, how you can work with the existing fabric of a building, but then extend it and really transform the perception of that building and how you read it today, but still reading the layers of history that you can uncover as part of the design. And then finally, Cromwell Place, which is the first of its kind art hub. So this is where 30 independent galleries operate within this building. They have exhibition space, so when you go there, it's ever changing. You never go and see the same exhibition, the same artists, because it's always changing. And our work was both restorative, but also in terms of a new architecture, in terms of this pavilion piece that sits at the back. So that's the intro to the main event, which is the talk. So, I was going to say a few words. So, we're passionate about retaining, reworking, and reimagining existing buildings. At BGY, we believe that the reinvention of the past is the key to the future, stitching buildings back into our creative fabrics. We've been in practice for over 25 years and have built our reputation on the clever and innovative use of existing buildings. This lecture explores a retro-first approach to the built environment, exploring the benefits in retaining and reimagining existing buildings, not just for the embodied carbon benefit, but which is crucial, but also the inherent cultural value, their historic importance, and their urban fabric and collective memory benefits. Being able to read a building's history, both past and present, in the layers we can reveal, gives our design approach a unique and special quality, a depth and delight. It provides a richness in materiality, in detailing, and the user's experience of a space or a building. Buildings provide us with an understanding of our towns, our cities and villages, both historically and socially. They provide us with a way of navigating our surroundings, and we as a practice want to build on this collective consciousness with the interventions that we make and the architecture we design and deliver. Carbon is rightly high on the agenda, and there is currently a huge focus on embodied and operational carbon in buildings. How we can retain existing buildings and the benefits this brings is important to us, along with how we build new, more sustainable architecture. But the embodied story runs over the life of a building, long after it's finished. We need to therefore think smarter, build less, and make sure that we do build can be adapted by users to last longer over the future of a building or space. So, the image on the screen at the moment is a project that we did on Fashion Street, which shows our university building project that we finished 15 years ago in the East End of London. You can read in this one view the old and the new. The Grade 2 listed Moorish Market building that used to shelter street traders in the East End of London, together with what we've then added as a core 10 steel and glass extension and readaptation to the building. Both buildings, both elements reflect their own time, but elements work in harmony with each other. What we've done is created a super flexible and adaptive building that can be reworked and changed in future generations. The other reason we're passionate about retaining buildings is because what the construction industry is doing to our environment. The simple fact is that we have to retain and reuse resources that we already have more intelligently. The idea of a circular economy which prioritises reuse is now part and parcel of us all achieving net zero. In this context, the most effective response is to reuse or repurpose existing buildings through retrofit and refurbishment. Sorry? Click it. No, it's fine. That's the bit I've written. The rest of it is ad lib. So we as a construction industry, and we are part of that industry as designers, the construction industry contributes some awful statistics to our environment. Nearly a quarter of the air pollution, half of the effect on climate change, the dirty water that we drink, and the amount of waste that we send to landfill. We are part of this discussion. We're part of the problem. We need to address this. The built environment contributes to an annual global CO2 of 42%. It's staggering in terms of what the construction industry is doing to the environment. At BGY, we are a redesign-led practice. 72%, nearly 3/4 of our projects retain some or all of the existing buildings. We believe that buildings should be retained, not because it's a good carbon discussion that's taken as read, but actually it's the cultural values, it's the historic importance, it's that idea that you navigate the city with your memory of what you've seen in terms of how important that is. And we think that that's a huge potential because each building is unique. Each project gives us something new to contemplate and to discover. And when you see some of the projects that I've shown you just now and what you're going to see, each one is responding in a different way to the brief that we've got and the building that is presented to us. So we are redesign-led. We champion the adaptive reuse and refurbishment of buildings. This is a 3-story space which was taken by a company called Moonpig. I don't know if they came to Thailand. But they love the space. They love the potential to actually change it. We didn't need to do anything more to it other than this because their imagination could take it to the next stage. We reimagine buildings. So many buildings have an inherent capacity to adapt and extend. The Dean was telling me about how we've extended this building. You know, that's part of what we do as architects and designers, is reimagine what we can do to buildings to take them to the next level. I showed you the image slightly earlier on, but we rarely demolish a building because we can see the potential to transform them into something that's quite wonderful. We reinvent them, we imagine them for a different use and a different generation take it forward. And we repurpose. We uncover layers, we discover things that are part of that building, and we turn that into the element of the design. So I'm going to take you through 4 really quite different projects. Technique, which is a workplace project in Clerkenwell. Cromwell Place, which is a gallery in South Kensington. Eccleston Yards, which is about placemaking and readaptation. And YY, which is a very big building in Canary Wharf, which takes the same principles from the earlier projects and takes it forward. So this is Technique, a transformational retrofit that balances the old and the new. And from this image, you're probably thinking all you did was just add this piece at the front. Well, we didn't. It was quite a bit more than that. So for those that know London, it sits somewhere between Clerkenwell, the Barbican and Old Street. This is what the building looked like before we started. The space on the corner used to be a little car park. We went through a whole series of design ideas about whether or not we should reclad the whole building, whether we should design this elevated pavilion, whether we should design this art box as a piece. And then we ended on the design on the right, which was all about introducing a new language into the streetscape. This was the brief that we had. This was be bold, be creative, be different, be sustainable, be about art, be about all of these things, be creative in our aspirations. So what we did was we did 3 things. We celebrated the reuse of sustainability. We celebrated the newness of sustainability. What could we add back that was new and different? And we also celebrated sustainability through art and how we design that. So we look at the reuse element. This was the building, again, as we found it, fairly nondescript, fairly ordinary in terms of the arrangement. It was built in 1962 as a print works. So all that happened in this building was that trucks used to arrive, deliver the paper, and then it was printed and then distributed. This is a model view that we took of the corner building. But the great thing was that when we peeled back the layers, we realized that actually what we had was this authentic, really rather special concrete frame building, which had a huge amount of potential. Even though it was painted white, even though it was covered in all of this stuff that we didn't particularly like, we knew that behind there was the opportunity to create spaces like this, where the old delivery yard could be this fabulous change in level between the outside and the inside, and where, when we grit blasted the brick, we exposed the aggregate to give us a really interesting depth and delight within the fabric of this building. So it was about seeing the potential in the structure and realizing what we could do with that. And when we look at a section through the building, we retained just under 70% of the building, which is the area identified in blue. And then you'll see in a minute what we added back in terms of the new construction above. So this is the floor, one of the floors when it was finished. And as architects and designers, we have to know a lot about a lot of things and a little bit about an awful lot of things. So understanding how buildings are serviced, how the ventilation works, is really important, because most people will just say, put it all in the ceiling, because that's where you always put it. In this building, all the services are in the floor. All we've got on the ceiling is lighting and smoke detection, because it means we can just celebrate the structure, we can celebrate what that space can deliver. And we put all of the boring stuff, the important stuff, in the floor. And it makes for wonderful workspace. And it allows us to take the outside of the building and to think sensitively about the refurbishment of that without throwing it away. And to celebrate details that were lost, that were really important to the history of the building. So that's the existing part, but then we extended the building, we made it bigger. But we did that in a way that was sensitive to the existing building. So we did the top third of the building as new glulam timber, okay? And what that did was it gave us this wonderful contrast between the concrete lower building and the timber upper building. But we took the same principle of delivering the services in the floor to allow us to celebrate the timber structure that sits above your head. And this is a structural engineer's drawing showing how we adopted the same column grid between the existing and the new, so that actually we had none of those transfer structures and things that would have been difficult to detail. And with that comes a fantastic carbon story, because we're not throwing things away, we're keeping it, we're avoiding sending things to landfill. All we're doing is just working with the existing building and building on top of that in a really sensible and sustainable way. So that's the floor above. So it's the same thing as below with the concrete, but now we're delivering it in timber. Again, same thing. All we've got on the ceiling is some lighting, some smoke detection, and all the hard work is being done in the floor. The other thing was, when you go in the space, it smells different. It actually smells like, it smells real, it smells like timber, it smells like something you don't get in other buildings, which is rather lovely. This is the space that's being fitted out at the moment on the roof, opening out onto a roof terrace. And this is the office space again that's being fitted out at the moment. So that's about retention, it's about addition. But the other thing that was really important to us was the art, and the art of the possible within the space. If you know Clerkenwell, it has a really vibrant part of the city. It has Clerkenwell Design Week, it has a lot of designers that are based in that part of London, and it brings with it a real vitality to that part of London, which is quite different to elsewhere. And we wanted to reflect that in the design of the common spaces. So, rewind, this is what we had, this gap, this missing tooth within the smile of the building. It used to be an old distillery. It used to have a building on there in the past, we realized that. And we went through a whole series of ideas about how could we add something back on the corner that would do something different to everything else. So we did it in brick, but you're thinking, well, Paul, that's not revolutionary. But it is, because this brick is made from the waste material on the site that's then cast into bricks and then reused as the material for this building. And these are the guys here, the professors in the lab, creating the bricks, creating the new tone, the new brick colour, the new dimensions that we have with the brick. And the great thing about this was we weren't picking something out of a catalogue. We were actually bespoking, making the colour that we wanted the brick to be in that location. And we saved 21 tonnes of waste going to a landfill somewhere on the outskirts of London. And this is what it looks like when it's finished. Each one of those are handmade bricks to our design that sit against the existing fabric of the building around it. And it has this lovely play of windows at ground floor level and the upper levels as well. And when we imagined this space, we imagined it in a way that could allow us to collaborate with these three gentlemen. And these three gentlemen are Italian, and they're called Forma Fantasma, which is an amazing name. And they take recycled materials and they use it in ceramics. So this is the waste material from Mount Etna volcano in Italy that's then transformed into these ceramic tiles. And you get this amazing diversity of colour from a dark brown to a light yellow colour. And we thought, wow, let's use that as part of our design for the reception. So you read a series of elements, you move away from traditional reception desks, somebody meeting and greeting you. That's part of that, part of the mix. But it's about reading a series of planes, about reading a series of objects in the space that are both art but functional as well in terms of their use. So on the right is the reception, in the middle is a plant pot, a receipt, a piece of art, and many different levels of interpretation. And this is it finished with this wonderful array of fantastic colour that you get from the waste material of a volcano in Italy. Reception on the right, art objects on the left. One of the guys in the office posing on the middle of the table, which he absolutely loves. And just having that richness you get from something that is made from a natural material. When you're looking at many different ceramic tiles, they tend to be the same colour or the same variation, but here you get a richness that you don't get in other processes. But what was revealed was, when you got up to the first floor, that we wanted to create a really special space. We wanted to create a gallery, but it was a gallery that could be a gallery, it could be a space for yoga, it could be a place of playing basketball, it could be an art place. But this idea that you can do many different things in that one space and that the flexibility is there. Bear in mind, this is a commercial project. We're working to a budget, to a brief for a client that allows, if they wanted to put a floor in here so that you could make 2 floors. It'd be a shame, but that's the way that we think in the practice in terms of how can we make something that is adaptable, that can change over time if, for whatever reason, basketball or art or yoga isn't what is needed in that space. It also makes a great party venue as well. And then these are finished images of it coming together. So that's project 1, project 2. This is Cromwell Place. A really unique project, and I'm sure lots of people have stood up here and told you that their project is unique and why am I any different? But I think this one is different because in central London, space is so expensive, as I'm sure it is in parts of your country, and it forces galleries to move away from the centre of where they want to operate and have to go to first floor or second floor space, and they can't actually have the visibility that they want. So this was an answer to a brief, which is why galleries don't want to rent space for 365 days of the year, because they're only showing art and artists for maybe half of that time. So they're paying rent on something that they're not using, because they're off to a show in Milan or to Chicago, wherever. They're not using the space. So this was a really clever model, because it meant that 30 galleries could become members of this art hub. They could have offices, but then they could use the space, rent the space when they needed to, when they had exhibitions, without paying rent on it for the whole year. So it was quite an interesting and innovative model to take forward. So, for those that know London, this is South Kensington Tube Station in the middle, and above here are the fabulous Natural History Museum that we've got on the top. So it's really well positioned in the art quarter of London. It's made up of a series of buildings. On the left, number 1 to 5 Cromwell Place, a collection of 4 and 5 story buildings, and then around it are sort of smaller scale muse buildings that are residential. And we categorized them a bit like a Sergio Leone film, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this was the good, the fabulous, the Victorian facades, which really were rather lovely. The potentially good, inside some of the spaces that we found were really well kept. But there was the bad, and the bad was all of these additions that were added in the 70s and 80s and 90s that really bore no resemblance to the Victorian architecture and were just very ordinary extensions. And then there was the downright ugly, and where people had just ignored the history, removed detailing, and completely lost the kind of essence of what was there. But the building came with a fantastic pedigree and a fantastic history. Number 5 is the building on the left. And Sir John Lavery was a very famous painter, and he painted many famous portraits. He painted Winston Churchill in this room, who sat on that chair. So it had a really interesting history as part of the buildings. The brief that we were given was about being an art hub, about being a place for creativity, about something that was changing all the time and allowed us to be quite inventive with how we approach these buildings. But as I mentioned, it needed to have an international appeal. People were going to come here, people were going to buy art, they were going to store art on the premises, they weren't going to take it away. So it had to cover a number of different things. But bear in mind, those lovely buildings 1 to 5 are actually listed, which means, I don't know if it's the same in your country, there's very little we can touch on those buildings, and how we go about trying to adapt them is really key. So, what do? First thing was, we took away all the bad bits in the middle, all the flat roofs. We then sensitively refurbished all the listed buildings on 1 to 5. And then we designed this new pavilion, this sort of jewel piece that was going to sit in that area that we took away all the old extensions. It gave us the opportunity to have multiple entrances. We could come off Thurlow Place, we could come off Cromwell Place, all those different ways in, where before we were dealing with just one entrance. The circulation was really important. The planning officers didn't let us knock holes through walls to connect rooms. So we needed to turn 5 individual buildings into something that was legible by a visitor who was coming there for the first time. So we came up with this concept of these bridge links at the back that allowed us to connect through. So if you look at a section, you've got Cromwell Place on the left, Thurlow Place Mews on the right, the listed buildings are on the left, the residential's on the right, and to some extent the gallery is a bit of an iceberg. You only see a small part of it at ground level, but actually below it you've got art storage and you've got plant equipment. So all the stuff that you need to service the building is down here. So there's a bit of a theme approaching where we like to service things from below because it avoids unsightliness at high level. And then how that works is that the main galleries are on ground and first, because if you know Victorian architecture, the largest rooms were always on the lower levels and the servants' quarters were always at the top. So the lower levels become galleries, the lower ground and second become second galleries, and then the office space is what we use for the roof, where we have a lower floor-to-ceiling height. So we started off by removing the past, taking away all those awful additions that were there in the room that were ruining the proportions. We started to peel back layers, found some amazing wallpapers, some old windows that were just bricked up and were lost to the whole kind of renovation. And then we were able to make a series of new spaces in certain locations that allowed us to connect through the buildings. And then we had some amazing craftsmen and women on site who were able to restore the balustrading, the timber flooring, all those elements that would become important to the way that the building was read. But because it was a classical house, it's not that convenient to display art. You have chimney breasts, you have recesses, and if artists want an expansive wall, then that's not conducive to a good gallery. So we designed these planes that didn't damage what was behind, but allowed us to go in front of the wall to allow us to present art in a way that was respectful to the building, but didn't damage the history. So, some before and after. So this was the gallery space when it was used, when we found as an office. That's how we then transformed it. So I'll go back and forward. This was an office that then became a gallery. This was the club room, delightful. That's how it was designed and then how it was fitted out. So that's the existing building, but then we had the job of designing this new pavilion. And this pavilion wasn't really visible from many different viewpoints. but the main viewpoint was from above, because you could look down on top of this building and see it in most of its glory. So we worked through a whole series of design iterations about what should that roof be, how should we design a roof of this pavilion building in this location. And we came up with this idea of a series of north lights that became this wing. Each one looked like it was a wing that tied in to the hip roofs of the adjacent buildings, but wasn't a hip roof, but was a modern interpretation of that arrangement. And these are some of the early renders that we did about how you would have a gap in the wall that would become the entrance to this space, how you would read this blackened steel cladding to the building that allowed us to create a very simple building with a dynamic roof face. And then looking at a section through the other way, you see the gallery, you see the north points through here, allowing light to come into this space. But down here is a whole floor of art storage, and below this is all the plant equipment needed to serve the buildings. This is a shot of the guys building the roof of the pavilion. And then on the left is the finished view, that you can see the hip roofs in the background of the historic buildings and how we've reimagined those in terms of the blackened steel, and then the space it creates at ground floor level in the gallery itself. So this was the space when it was finished, this sort of 4 or 5 meter high space, top lit, which looks lovely, but it looks better when it's got art in it, and it's actually used for the purpose that it was designed for, which was to sort of present art in that location. This is the view from the street. Again, quite a modest building from the outside, quite a sort of polite building, but it's when you get inside that it reveals itself and you see a different way to view the building. And then just to sort of show some of the issues that we had. So we had a real challenge to get it through planning, because this is in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and they don't like double basements. Mainly because people that live in Kensington and Chelsea want double basements for swimming pools, but we wanted it for art storage and plant equipment. And this is the sort of gymnastics that we had to go through to prop up the existing buildings on the left and create the new space down below for the art and the gallery. And below that level is racks of art storage under temperature control, so that people can buy and trade art, leave the art here, or whatever. And then the final piece was joining it together. As I mentioned, we could only make limited routes through the building. So how do we connect each of those 5 buildings in a coherent way? Well, we came up with this idea that we'd have this lightweight series of bridges that would allow us to do that. And this is one of the bridges, as you see it, under construction on the left and on the right finished. You read the historic building on the left, you see the modern architecture on the right, and you see the bridge glimpsing on the top left and on the right-hand side, giving views back to the pavilion. And then between those were what we call the closet wings, which in Victorian times was where you put the water closet, which was the WC, the toilet. But we were using these to allow us to connect down from the house, from the pavilion up to the historic buildings. And here you see on the left where we started, where we got to, and then where we finished. Revealing the layers, seeing the detail of the existing building coming through in terms of how you read the history. You can see what's original, you can see what we've added in terms of the timber construction, and you can see the two together. Some more views of those link pieces coming together. So in some ways, this is the whole presentation in one slide, past to present, reimagining what we've done in the history of this building and reimagining it as a gallery, but then also bringing a new conversation in terms of the new gallery space that you see on the right-hand side. Next project, Eccleston Yards. So this was a development for Grosvenor, a large landowner in central London. And as I mentioned before, it was an old car park. So it was something that the client came to us and said, we want to have a vibrant ground floor experience. We're not quite sure what's going to go in there, but we want to work with us to reimagine what that could be. So for those that know London, this is Victoria Coach Station on the left, that's Victoria train station on the right, and I think the rest of it is London. And we're going to look at this project in two phases. Phase one was the formation of the yards, the formation of the principles that we had, and then phase two is the ice factory, which is a large building component that forms part of the overall arrangement of the yards. So this was what we found when we were appointed, some fairly average looking buildings, a space that you could park your car in, but not much else. The buildings were unloved and untreated and were just left for subsequent people to use as they saw fit. But when we started again to see what was behind there, we realised that actually there was some real joy in the building and how we could reimagine that. So we had to work to a tight brief. We had very little money to spend, low intervention, big impact, and to use the ground floor as the way to generate an interest and a vitality in this new project. So we came up with a whole mix of uses. So that was restaurants, it was bars, it was maker spaces where people could actually sell what they were making on the ground floor, but they could be making it on the upper floor. So we're really trying to bring in there a whole range of uses. We also had a gym, because the gym was really important because they could then activate the external space as well as part of their classes. And we had like sketches and ideas about what it could be. We were quite loose with the kind of the concept because we didn't know at that stage what was going to be put in there. So these were some early renders that we did about opening up from the street to go into the yards, about what you would see when you stepped in there in terms of the planting, the architecture, the wayfinding, the signage, and then also thinking about branding and how the branding might work in that space and how the ground and first floor could help animate the space that was left over. So some finished photographs. This is now the new entrance to the yards. Just a simple addition of tiling at sort of ground floor level really starts to focus the attention on the low level and allows the history of what happens above to be in that position, and the use of signage is really important. An aerial view of how the space came together, and on day one, when the sun shines in London, not always, it's a really engaging and energetic space, but it's also something that supports what happens behind here. So these were known as the giraffe sheds, because someone imagined that a giraffe might be put in there one day. They never were, but they were just lovely tall spaces. So we looked at these as being maker spaces. So they're selling on the ground floor what they're making on the first floor, and it's quite interesting. And then it was about the shop fronts that we put in, the detailing that we did in the shop fronts that brought the ground floor to life. But also the spaces that we uncovered behind. This was an A-frame garage that we used to service cars, but makes for a fabulous dining space and restaurant and bar, which is really, really successful. But also the ground floor, the external space, is used for art, it's used for entertaining, it's used for installations. This was a sensory installation that we did that was done in the space, that you walk through and experience different things. It also comes to life at night with lighting, so that there's a real kind of vibrancy to the way that we think about the space. So in some ways, what we did was not very much, but it was also a huge amount to support the functions. And then in the summer, when Wimbledon's on, they put a big screen up and everyone drinks Pimm's and watches the Wimbledon. And because we had a gym on the ground floor, they could then use this space as part of their studios. So it was always changing, it was always evolving as a space in terms of how you can make space work. Second phase was the ice factory. So keep this picture in your mind. That's the starting point. So a fairly ordinary building with a sort of lopsided piece to the left, a series of crystal windows, some steel work, and not much else. It was originally designed to house ice. So back in the Victorian ages, we didn't have a way of producing it, so it was used to be produced in here, and then restaurants and whoever bought ice and took it away. It was latterly used as a car, not a showroom, a car repair place. So if you had a broken car, you used to take it here and it got mended. This was the view from the yards to back to the building, and that was a view inside. So what we did was in some ways quite simple. We took the roof off, and then we built a building within the building. So we let the existing frame of the building express itself, but also then the new piece would then have a life of its own and a language of its own that could be read in conjunction with that. So you get this existing piece here, and then the new piece that sits at the top. And the windows that we didn't need were then bricked over, and then the new windows just create a new rhythm on the co-joined facade in that arrangement. The steel work at the low level is retained, and the arches are reintroduced. And because this was central London, there were an awful lot of people living around this building that had something called rights to light. I don't know whether you have that in Thailand. If you have a building or a room, a bedroom, a living room, you have a right to light to come into your space. And people get very animated, quite rightly so, in London if they lose their right to light. And therefore the roof profile is very much organised to minimise the effect on the neighbours who live around the building. This was a model we made of that arrangement, and the roof is doing a lot of work. It's doing about of north light, it's giving articulation, it's helping giving an identity to the building as a whole. This was one of the early views we made. Here you can see the line of the building that was there before, the windows that we've blocked up, the steel work that we've exposed, but the two are working together. The new openings, the new architecture is expressing itself as part of that arrangement. And then the view from the yards. Internally, the roof was to be a restaurant, and that's going to be fitted out in a couple of months as a restaurant, and the lower levels are workplace, are offices. And some finished photographs. So this is now another entrance into the yards, seeing the building, seeing the structure that we've retained, the brickwork of the lower building that's kept, the infills within the window, and then the contemporary pieces that crash through that, but are allowing that building to read as a whole. The view from the top, all the roofs have got solar panels, so we can get the benefit of that roofscape in terms of energy efficiency and what we're doing. And you can start to again see the reading of the existing building here and how we've set back the new brick to sit behind that building. And then the view from the yards looking back, again, seeing on this elevation the retained facade and the new facade that grows out at the top. The final project, why London? Why? Sorry, I'm going to sing then. Sorry. So why? This is Canary Wharf, and there's a new generation of users in Canary Wharf. The climate is changing. Canary Wharf was conceived because the City of London couldn't accommodate the floor plates and the scale of office buildings that the City of London needed to deliver. So they reinvented a part of the city in Canary Wharf. This was the building as it was designed in 1991 for Thomson Reuters. And one of the memorable pieces was this ticker tape, which told the world what share prices were what was happening into the world and whether the economy was up or down. And this was the building after it was finished, with much of Canary Wharf still not being built yet. So it was very much a first generation building to be delivered as part of Canary Wharf. So when we were appointed on this, we said we need to keep the building, for sure. We can extend the building because we know that there's a capacity in the structure to do that. And the benefits kind of speak for themselves on the right in terms of the saving on CO2, if you translated that into flights and to boiling a kettle, you know, it's really, really important. So we took the building apart, we repositioned cores, but we kept the structure that you see on the screen here in terms of how we imagined the building and what we needed to do in terms of keeping it for structural integrity. But then we looked at how we would fenestrate the building, how we would articulate the building. We had a verticality, we had a rhythm, and then we came this idea about a twist, about how the two could work together to create a motif for the building that would ultimately lead to a branding of the building, the YY building, and how the structure creates this series of Ys, the way that it hits the ground, but then also the way that it's celebrated at the top of the building. So we talk about being entrepreneurial, we talk about being agents. That, in a way, is how we think. We think about architecture, we think about interiors, we think about placemaking, and we think about branding as one continuous conversation that's all related to what we do in terms of the built environment. So this was a render, a twilight shot, showing how that YY structure hits the ground, how we're revealing it at the top, but also how we're introducing these sort of sky gardens so that each tenant can have access to external space for terraces. And some finished photographs. So this is now the new approach. When you come out of the tube station, you see the building, it presents itself in a completely different way. It's more open, it's more inviting, it's more legible as a piece of architecture. And the CGI matches reality. The winter gardens work, they thrive. You know, even though it is central London, they do get used in terms of an amenity. And the top of the building is a joy in terms of the way the structure celebrates itself. Some drawings just to show what we did. So as part of workplace design, you know, a lot of work goes into the design of cores and all the things that go in the background. And that's all part of what we do as a designer, as architects, to deliver projects. But when you step inside, there was a chance to do something different, a chance to do things in a different way. So here we've got a triple height space. We have planting that is established within that space, that we use these parasol moments on the ceiling to help reflect what's happening at the lower level. And because it's London, this tree, it rotates every hour, very, very slowly, so that all sides of the tree get light and then it doesn't die. Because I don't know if you know, but in some very famous phone shops, they lose a lot of plants because they aren't able to actually give the whole thing enough light. So this was, in many ways, dealing with that as a principle. The before, very ordinary, very boring way to enter a building. Now the building opens up and you are sort of celebrating the way that you can come into the building. The reception space is dramatic. You're reading the structure that you've got on the outside as part of the reception space. That ticker tape is now reinvented as a light feature, and that light feature allows us to either become a piece of art, to become text, to become informational, lots of different things, but it's now got many more uses other than just telling us whether the footsy's up or the footsy's down. We also designed the bathrooms, the changing rooms, etc. And then delivered good quality office space on the upper levels, and some more pictures of it finished. And then the sort of joy that you get at the top of the building. And then at the top, it's crowned off by a landscape terrace. So again, using that space, giving tenants the availability to access communal space, particularly in Northern Europe, is really important. Being able to give people a break from their workspace and have somewhere to go is really key to the success of buildings now. And then, nearly at the end, the sort of twilight shot of the building, and that's me done. Thank you very much.
So, any questions from the audience?
Thanks for your impressive presentations, and my question is about the how you convincing your project owners to pay more budget to create some like the adaptive reuse projects or adaptive reuse things in the buildings. I think it's in your project that you work on is pay more expensive more than the conventional buildings, and that's why I want to know how you convincing them to allow you to create it.
This project was really cost effective. This was just about putting some shop fronts in and making adaptive space. So this was not an expensive budget. This one was, because we were stitching together the building. But in some ways, we didn't have a choice, or the client didn't have a choice, because they own these listed buildings. They couldn't demolish them, and what they needed to do is to bring them back into life, because they weren't very good as office buildings, and they imagined that they would be better as galleries. So each project has over on this side the pros and the cons, the positives and negatives, and whether the project stacks up. So it's always underplayed, that each one of these jobs is affordable to deliver. We're never given carte blanche to just spend our clients' monies willy-nilly. It has to generate a return for them, whether it's an office building on the left or another office building here on the right. In this building, we kept nearly 3/4 of it. So we didn't have the cost of dropping the building, clearing it, and then building again. We had all of that for free. We didn't need to pay anyone for it, because that was there. So I think having existing buildings to work with is often cheaper than having to start again. Yes, there can be problems, because you can discover things that you wouldn't have known about because they were covered over by plasterboard or whatever. But there should be a strong economic case from being a more cost-effective project if you can keep a big part of the building.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the inspiring presentation. I want to ask about the same question as this. Since you said that you had about 70% of work about adaptive reuse, right?
Yes.
So I would like to ask, how do you start with? I mean, do you start with that the owners want to keep, the clients want to keep the buildings, or it was you guys who convinced them to keep the buildings? We're not sure, because in Thailand we don't have these kind of projects much. Maybe it's because of the tax deduction that if you keep the buildings, it would be like your benefits, or.
I think there's a number of things at play here. So we have something in the UK called ESG, environmental social governance, which means that big corporations need to be able to stand in front of their shareholders and say, we are doing this, this and this with our money, with your money, in terms of the way that we operate as a business. And part of that is the E, the environmental piece. So if they move into a building that has a rubbish EPC rating, you've knocked down a building to create that building, then shareholders can say, you're not being honest to your credentials of ESG, you're greenwashing, you're giving it lip service. So what we've seen in the UK in the last 5 years is a huge swing towards sustainability, where people can now no longer just demolish a building without having a very good reason to do that. So that's point number one. Point number two, local authorities now are insisting that you do everything you can to keep a building before they will consider whether you knock it down. Because the reason is if you knock a building down, you upset all your neighbours, because you're demolishing it, you're making a lot of noise, you're getting rid of all the material, and then you've got to bring it all back on site again and build it again from new. So they've realised that actually this is a vote winner to keep people on side in terms of that, and it's also good design sense in terms of needing to respect the history and what we've got in our country. So that's two reasons. And I think the third reason is that clients are now really aware of this. They're really aware that if they want to attract tenants into their building, if they want to get the planners on side, if they want to get shareholders on side, they have to tread more lightly when it comes to the environment, and therefore there's a real movement to make sure that this approach is ingrained in everything that the country does, so that they are not seen as being sort of, that they're being straight with everything. So I appreciate it's different in different countries, but the Northern European countries are very much aware of this and are very much sort of, it's driving it. And now, even though in the UK we have a bit of a recession, and in past recessions, the first thing that anyone stopped doing was being sustainable, because you pay a premium to some degree to do that. But this time, that hasn't happened. People are still maintaining that ESG credential, that sustainable position, and I think we won't see a change from that. I think it's quite rightly here to stay.
Thanks for your presentation. Really like your work. But I want to know your idea about how you compose the material or new elements to your existing buildings, and what is your idea? And another question is, how would you imagine the current design in the future? How would it be, or how would it transform into something like the existing building in the future?
That's a good question. I think there's two questions there. I'll ask the second part first. I think we've found that, certainly in the UK, warehouse buildings are inherently flexible. You look at other buildings that we designed in the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, which were designed for one use, and how unadaptive they are. In fact, we built a career in changing buildings from the 70s and 80s and 90s. But warehouse buildings typically had tall ceilings, lots of light, very good floor loading, so they could store lots of materials on there. And as a result, we like living in warehouses, we like working in warehouses, we like turning warehouses into different uses, because they are inherently flexible as a building typology. And I think that's how we think about the future, that we see about the future, about how something can be adapted. If you remember when we were doing this project here, there's no floor up there. It's a wonderful double height space that can be used for many different things, but we're not naive to think that somebody might want to come and put 2 floors in there because they could have 2 boardrooms or 2 other spaces. So we've given them the flexibility to do that, but it can come out if it needs to, if it's put in the future, or it can go in there. So we're always looking at how we can think about the future and imagine a different scenario. So I think, does that answer your question? I mean, how we approach each project, I think, is unique, because hopefully each one of these looks quite different, because each one has a different brief and a different location. We wouldn't do what we did in Canary Wharf in South Kensington or in Clerkenwell, because it's not appropriate. It wouldn't fit. You know, it's not. We don't do cookie cutter. We don't do BGY here, BGY there, BGY. You know, we think about each different location and what makes that space unique or that place unique.
Thank you. I want to know about your processing, about what you should keep and not to keep, and you need to check design in the future, or if something have a problem, do you have a second plan for checking construction?
So, often give this a lot of thought in terms of when we look at a building, what are the most important things that we are looking for in order to be able to keep something? And 9 times out of 10, it's where the slabs are positioned. So if they're positioned at a position that allows good floor to ceiling height, good space, good volume, then that normally is inherently flexible. The problem comes where the floors are positioned very, very lowly. So in residential properties, you only need 2.4 floor to ceiling height, which means that the slabs are about 3 meters. That isn't a good space to put an office in, because office spaces need 2.6, 2.8, 2.9. You want the height. So we often look at existing buildings and how that informs our decision-making process. We looked at a project recently about how to turn a car park, which has very, very low floor to ceiling heights, into something else. And we came up with this idea we could take out every other floor, so you could create this lovely volume. So we keep the essence of a building, but we would take out pieces that we didn't need. So I think we're, as a profession, problem solvers as well as being creative, and that's probably one of the problems that we have to solve when we're being creative in terms of the buildings that we design.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for such a wonderful presentation of your work. I'm particularly interested in the third case studies, which is Eccleston Yards.
Yes.
Could you elaborate more about how you deal with, or what was your idea behind the way you treat the surface, that you reveal the trace of the old, and I think it's blend quite perfectly with the new surface. I think before your finished work, your team and you must have a wide variety of options to deal with this issue. And could you tell us more about each detail and information why you select to do this way?
So we do a lot of discussion before we start a project. So we sit down and think about what the client wants, what the brief is, what the ambition is, and really use that as an opportunity to discuss how we approach a project before we've actually put pen to paper and decided it's that colour or that line or whatever. So with that project, Eccleston Yards, because it was very much a 2-part project, the first one was about what could we do at ground and first floor to reveal spaces, reveal the use that would be behind that. That was one conversation, but then the real challenge was the ice factory, because everything told us that the building wasn't worth keeping, that they were keeping so little of it, that why are we fighting so hard to keep, you know, a a small part of that. And I think because a number of factors come at play, there's the sustainability piece, there's the local authority, there's also the neighbours as well. You've got probably 50 families all backing onto that one building, and what they don't want to see is everything come down and then to be rebuilt again. So if we could find a way to thread this building in there, then we felt that that was the right thing to do. And in the end it was, because it delivers a great piece of design that hopefully will be there and be flexible for the future for future generations. So I think it's a complex series of considerations that come together to determine whether or not something should be kept or not. Does that go any way to answer the question? Yeah.
I think we still got to have like a few last questions. Any interior architecture student?
So I would like to ask about could you explain more about the start process? I think you have to work with the building investigation for structure, for existing structure, something like that, or could you explain more?
Yeah. So we do a lot in the early stages of research. So we work with structural engineers, mechanical engineers to understand what the capacity is to do with the building. So on Cromwell Place, for instance, because we were surrounded by Grade 2 listed buildings and we were designing something that was going to go in between them as this sort of this jewel that sat there, we realised that we couldn't put things on the roof, because normally you put all of your air handling equipment, all of the cooling just goes on the roof because that's where it needs to be. So that conversation with the engineer meant that we had to find a way to put it in the ground, which is not the best place to put air conditioning units and whatever in the ground because they need fresh air. So we had to design a route down there that would allow fresh air to come in, to be processed, to be then moved around the building. So if we hadn't unlocked that part of the equation, we couldn't have designed the effortlessly simple pavilion and the beautiful listed rooms, because we couldn't have serviced them in a way that would have allowed us to be that creative. So that part of the process of sitting down with all of the professionals and understanding what the limitations are, you know, with this building, how many floors could we add on? You know, we had an existing structural grid, we knew where the columns were. Could we build back? Yes, we could. Could we do it in steel? Yes, but we wanted to do it in timber. You know, did the deflection work? When you walk across a timber floor, you get more bounce. On this floor, it's concrete, it doesn't move. You know, will that deflection be acceptable to a tenant? Will they notice that there's a bit of movement in the floor? All those things are part of the brief and part of the exploration that are integral to how we think and design for the projects that we do.
I think the last question will be from me. I'm trying to find common themes for these four projects. And I think to build a new building is much more easier. And a part of like what I see, the common things is mostly try to keep the old structure, like for example the ceilings. In terms of that, I think what I would like to ask that what it means to you when it comes to like the authentics or the value of the old building, you know, the context of each project that you got from the brief. Is that only the elements or the tangible one, or are there any intangible value of your projects and works?
I you've left the best one to the last, haven't you? That's a really difficult one. I think if you look at why, and I hadn't told you that was an existing building, you probably wouldn't have known that we kept that. So in many ways, that is a great project to show that you can keep the bones of something and reimagine it and not really know that it's a building that was built in 1991. So I think we don't always feel like we need to express every nut and bolt and brick or whatever to make that conversation real, because that does that perfectly well. These other three projects do celebrate where the building started and read the layers and the history that you see through that. And in that context, we let that drive the conversation about what the aesthetic is and how we want to do it. Even with this one, we didn't want that space to be something different other than a piece of art, because we saw that that was a really interesting thing to do, to create this corner block that was quite different to everything else, that could have a new conversation about what it was to come into a building and to be into a workplace without then needing to replicate an exposed concrete on the floor, on the ceiling, or brick. So I think we're never just thinking about what this looks like. We're thinking about what is the art of the possible, what is the art of what we can do that is really special. You're going to discover that the rest of the building is existing in 5 minutes when you walk through the space, but that doesn't mean we can be lazy and not design something truly special.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I think thank you so much for your presentations and the conversation after the talk. We have a group photo with the audience.
Yeah?
So, yeah, maybe can we add information? เดี๋ยวข้างบนช่วยขยับลงมาได้ไหมคะจะได้เป็นอยู่ด้านหน้าด้วยกัน
Should we standing or sitting?
You can sit here
Sit here.
in the
There.
crowd. Yeah. Thank you so much. Please join in giving a round of applause to Paul.